My husband declared at our Thanksgiving feast, "I'm putting the house on the market. My mistress needs a larger place for her little ones." Our grown kids froze in shock as he laid out his fresh start like it was a business plan. I rose silently, walked to my handbag, and handed him a folder. "Since you're dropping bombshells," I said evenly, placing it in his hands. Inside that folder were the papers that would blow his plans apart. The sweet potato pie was still steaming on the burner when Lamont's phone chimed for the 8th time that day. I watched him peek at the screen from the living room entryway, his face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in years. Not for me, of course. "Darling, can you help with the ham?" I called out, struggling with the 25-pound glazed beast that had been roasting since sunrise. The room was warm with the scent of herbs and sweetness, a fragrance that carried me back to the days I spent in my grandmother's kitchen when I was Cherie's age. I'd been on my feet since 4:30 a.m., determined to deliver a flawless Thanksgiving. "Hold on," he muttered, eyes glued to his screen, thumbs tapping away. I hefted the ham myself, feeling that familiar pinch in my lower back, a reminder that I was no longer in my 30s. At 62, I was still preparing a celebration I'd planned for an entire week, while my husband couldn't spare a moment from his device to help. Still, I swallowed the irritation. Today was about family. Dorian had flown in from Detroit the night before, looking polished in a crisp blazer, though there was a faint tiredness behind his eyes. His consulting job drained him, yet he'd made the effort to come home. Cherie arrived at dawn, bursting with her usual spark, arms full of champagne and stories from her doctoral program. Seeing them both seated again at my table, laughing and catching one another up, made every bit of effort worthwhile. The dining room looked radiant. I'd brought out my great-aunt's porcelain, the fine gold-trimmed set saved only for the most special occasions. The focal point was a harvest basket I'd dedicated 3 hours to assembling, with tiny gourds, fall foliage, and LED tea lights that danced like authentic fire. Lamont had strolled by it 4 times without uttering a word. "Ma, this cornbread dressing is amazing," Dorian remarked, scooping a third helping. "Is this the recipe Nana passed down, with some tweaks?" I grinned, observing him relish every morsel. I tossed in some dried cranberries this time. Cherie lifted her champagne flute. "To Ma for orchestrating yet another Thanksgiving wonder." Her face glowed from the sparkling rosé, and she appeared so youthful and joyful that my chest tightened. We toasted, and for an instant all seemed aligned. This was what I'd envisioned while pressing linens at 5:30 a.m., while I manually whipped yams rather than relying on the blender since they came out superior that way. This comfort, this bond, this feeling of unity. Lamont's cell chimed once more. He eyed it, and a change crossed his features. "All good, Pops?" Cherie inquired, spotting his diversion. "Yeah," he replied swiftly, tucking the device into his jeans. But his knee was jittering beneath the table, as it did when he was stressed over an issue. I'd shared 28 years with this man. I recognized his signals, the way he coughed when preparing to voice something tough, the way he dodged gazes when concealing a secret, the way he squared his posture when about to deliver a statement he deemed significant. He was exhibiting all 3 at this moment. "Actually," Lamont stated, rising so suddenly that his seat grated against the oak planks. The noise sliced through our chatter like a blade. Dorian and Cherie glanced up at him, utensils midway to their lips. He coughed. "There's something I need to share with y'all." His tone carried that artificial ease he employed in corporate huddles, the inflection that indicated he'd practiced this scene. My gut sank. "Lamont," I murmured, "can't this hold till after the meal?" He ignored me. "I'm listing the house." The phrase struck the gathering like a slap. Cherie's flute halted en route to her mouth. Dorian's spoon rattled on his dish. "Huh?" Cherie breathed. But Lamont pressed on. He gazed beyond us now, as though addressing a conference room rather than his kin. "Renee and the young ones require more room. Rashid's 9 now, Javante's 7, and Tiny Tia just hit 5. They're sprouting quick, and her condo is cramped." The hush that ensued was overwhelming. I could detect the wall clock chiming in the foyer, the faint drone of the freezer, the thump of my pulse in my temples. Renee. He'd uttered her name in our supper space at our Thanksgiving spread before our offspring. The lady whose presence I'd feigned ignorance of for months. Dorian's complexion had drained. "Pops, what you mean?" "Renee's my lady," Lamont proceeded, as if chatting about the forecast. "We've been an item for 9 months. She got 3 little ones from her last union, and they deserve steadiness. A proper residence." Cherie emitted a noise like she'd been struck. "Lady." I remained utterly motionless, my palms clasped in my lap, observing my kids' expressions shatter. This was his method of informing them, not discreetly, not tenderly, not with any regard for their emotions, like a deal closing. The property will move fast in this economy, Lamont continued, blind to the ruin he was inflicting. Renee spotted a lovely spot in Oak Ridge with a spacious yard and solid schools, 6 bedrooms, 4 baths. The kid's gonna adore it. What about us? Cherie's words were scarcely audible. What about Ma? At last, Lamont faced me. There was a boldness in his demeanor, as if he anticipated I'd cause a fuss, weep or yell or plead, to hand him ammo to depict me as the overwrought spouse who couldn't cope with his joy. Instead, I got up deliberately, composedly, and headed to my handbag on the sideboard. My grip was firm as I pulled out the folder I'd toted for 4 weeks, awaiting the opportune instant. Or perhaps the direst one, which evidently was this. I returned to the spread and set the folder beside his plate, directly atop the honey-glazed smear he'd created amid his monologue. "Since you're dropping bombshells," I stated softly, locking eyes with him for the initial time that day. Then I resumed my seat, grasped my utensil, and sampled the collard greens. They tasted like dust, but I masticated regardless, holding gaze with the guy who'd just wrecked our clans' Thanksgiving with the nonchalant viciousness of someone reciting a shopping roster. The folder rested there between us like a primed explosive, and for the first occasion since he'd begun, Lamont appeared unsure. Lamont's digits lingered above the tan folder as if it could sting. The assured executive who'd just proclaimed the disposal of our kin's abode had vanished, supplanted by a figure who seemed truly alarmed. His palm trembled as he grasped it, gauging its heft. "What is it, Pops?" Dorian's tone pierced the strain, but his focus stayed on his dad's visage. There was a shift in my boy's look, a sternness I'd never beheld. The figure he'd idolized his whole existence had just exposed himself as an outsider. Lamont flipped the folder, inspecting the flap. I'd inscribed his name in my elegant script, the identical penmanship that had endorsed holiday greetings and milestone missives for nearly 3 decades. But this seemed distinct, terminal. "Beverly, what?" he commenced, but the phrases faded in his gullet when he regarded me. I maintained my countenance impartial, nearly tranquil. Let him ponder, let him fret. Cherie was eyeing us both, her flute abandoned in her grasp. "Ma, you all right?" Her tone was tiny, exposed. She was still digesting her dad's revelation, attempting to fathom how her reality had just tilted. I extended across the table and clasped her unoccupied hand. "I'm good, baby." And astonishingly, I was. For the first time in ages, I felt utterly commanding. Lamont stowed the folder in his coat lining without unsealing it. The ease on his face was nearly laughable, as though delaying the unavoidable would magically erase it. But I could perceive the intrigue gnawing at him, the manner his hand repeatedly wandered back to his lining. "Ain't you gonna crack it?" Dorian queried, his inflection bearing a sharpness that caused Lamont to wince. "Afterward?" Lamont muttered, extending for his tea tumbler. His throat had parched. The vibe encircling our splendid Thanksgiving array had transformed utterly. What had been cozy-kin dialogue was now awkward and strained. Cherie kept darting glances between her dad and me, striving to assemble a riddle she lacked all the fragments for. Dorian had ceased dining altogether, his mandible tightened. I persisted with my repast, delighting in each nibble. The ham was ideally succulent. The dressing boasted just the proper blend of spices, and the cranberry relish struck that ideal harmony of tangy and sugary. All those spans of readiness hadn't been squandered. After all, this banquet would assuredly be unforgettable. "So, Tarivshike," I remarked casually, slicing another ham portion. "How long Renee been aiding you in choices about our dwelling?" Lamont's utensil clanged on his dish. "Beverly, not here." "When then?" I posed, my tone still serene. "After you boxed my stuff? After you swapped the bolts?" Cherie's flute struck the table firmer than planned. "You for real doing this? You truly leaving Ma for some chick with babies?" "It's messy," Lamont uttered, the standard retort of a fella who knew he was off base but couldn't own it. "Nah," Dorian asserted resolutely. "It ain't messy at all." That's when Lamont's cell commenced vibrating. He peeked at the display, and I spied her name flicker, Renee. Even now, even amid demolishing his kin, she couldn't grant him peace for one feast. The device vibrated repeatedly. "Pick it up," I murmured. "Don't let us hinder you from tending to your main concerns." He rejected the call, his cheeks reddening. "It's the office." Cherie outright chuckled, but there was zero mirth in it. "On Thanksgiving at 8,000 p.m. The cell vibrated a 5th time. Lamont's poise was fracturing. He kept grazing his lining where the folder concealed, his knee jittering more wildly under the table. You know what? Dorian rose sharply, his serviette tumbling to the planks. I ain't hungry no more. He regarded his dad with such letdown that even I sensed it. 28 years wed, Pops. 28 years of what I figured was a solid clan. And you reveal your fling at Thanksgiving supper like you breaking down fiscal reports. Dorian, you don't get it. I get it, Crystal. Dorian's tone was icy, restrained. You figured your bliss outweighed Ma's respect, outweighed our kin customs, outweighed facing your kids without fibbin'. Lamont parted his lips to counter, but Dorian was already striding off. We heard his steps on the staircase, then the solid snap of his old room door shutting. Cherie's eyes shimmered with held-back tears. Daddy, she breathed, employing the title she hadn't used in ages. How you do this to us? For a beat, Lamont's facade crumbled fully. I spotted remorse flash across his traits, authentic ache at wounding his girl. But then his cell buzzed anew, and the instant evaporated. This time he took it. Can't chat now, he said lowly, pivoting from the spread. But Cherie and I could catch Renee's voice via the receiver, piercing and insistent. We couldn't discern terms, but the pitch was evident. She wasn't pleased about being sidelined. I said, can't chat, Lamont reiterated, his tone taut. He terminated the connection and promptly flipped his cell screen down on the table. The quiet that trailed was thunderous. Cherie was gawking at her dad like she was beholding him fresh. I kept on eating, allowing the stillness to linger among us. Sometimes quiet conveyed more than speech ever might. At last, Cherie spoke. I need some breeze. She rose cautiously, her actions purposeful and steady. Ma, want help tidying the table? That's fine, baby. Go catch some fresh air. After she departed, it was solely Lamont and me across from one another at the table, where we'd partaken innumerable repasts, marked milestones, aided our kids with assignments, mapped our tomorrow. The folder in his lining might as well have been a countdown device. Beverly, he uttered eventually. We gotta converse. I truly regarded him for the first time in months. When had he turned so alien? When had the fella I'd cherished enough to forge an existence with morphed into someone who could ravage his kin over cobbler and custard? Nah, I stated plainly, rising and starting to pile the dishes. We really don't. That evening, I retired early and secured the chamber door after me. I could hear Lamont treading below, likely summoning nerve to unseal the folder. Let him tread. Let him speculate. I slumbered sounder than I had in ages. The morning post-Thanksgiving, I stirred to a vacant abode. Lamont had dipped before daybreak, probably to dodge confronting the folder, still scorching a gap in his coat lining. I brewed tea in the serene cook space, observing vapor ascend from my cup as recollections I'd been burying for months at last emerged. It had commenced in April, such a regular Wednesday, when all began to fray, though I didn't realize it then. Lamont arrived home 4 hours tardy, his shirt faintly creased, ascertain the partner session had extended. I'd warmed his supper in the oven, inquired about his day, heeded his fatigued replies, the ideal faithful spouse, but something felt amiss. Maybe it was how he evaded my gaze, or how he bathed straight away instead of lounging on the sofa as habitual. Minor stuff, wee cracks in our pattern that I rationalized, because the option was too frightening to ponder. The extended eves became routine. Major pitch comin', okay, he'd say, snagging his briefcase. Don't stay up. I'd recline in bed listening for his vehicle in the drive, checking the time as the midnight flipped to 1 a.m., then 3. When I probed about the overtime, he'd exhale deeply, making me feel bad for doubting his commitment to supporting our kin. May ushered the scrapped agendas. Our milestone supper booking at Chez Monique, the eatery where he'd knelt 29 years back, got deferred due to an urgent client dilemma. The concert passes Cherie had gifted for my birthday went unused when Lamont abruptly had to jet to Phoenix. Each letdown arrived with detailed regrets and vows to compensate later. Later never materialized. Renee Hayes first surfaced as a label in Idle Talk. Renee from Finance reckons we ought to revamp the monthly summaries. Renee proposed a fresh app for monitoring accounts. Merely another associate in Lamont's growing enterprise, someone whose views he esteemed occupationally. Then I began noticing her on his cell. The initial snapshot was harmless enough. A crew pic from the firm holiday bash I'd missed 'cause of a migraine. Renee was auburn-haired, slim, positioned just near enough to Lamont to snag my notice. She possessed the sort of radiant, smooth complexion that hinted at someone at least 15 years my junior than my 62. But it was the follow-up pick that made my belly plummet. Lamont and Renee at what seemed a diner. Her 3 young'uns huddled around them. She was chortlin at something he'd uttered, her palm on his forearm while a little girl with braids perched on his knee like she fit there. I stumbled on it by chance, swiping through his cell to view the radar when mine was juicin'. The pic was timestamped 3 weeks prior on a Sunday when Lamont had swore he was hoopin' with his old frat brother Kendrick. Who these babies, wayazige? I asked that night, displaying the screen. My tone was steady, inquisitive, giving him full chance to clarify. Lamont hardly eyed the cell before diving into his account. Oh, that's Renee from the job. She navigatin' a rough split, needed a ear, them her kids. Adorable, huh? Poor lil ones really grappling with their folks dividin'. The tale was slick, rehearsed, delivered with just as the right dash of worry for Renee's imagined ordeal. But I noted how he snatched his cell back pronto, how his digit shifted to erase the pic without ponderin'. You assistin' her with her split. I nudged softly. Somebody gotta. His pitch held that rim of virtue that signified the chat was done. She ain't got many pals, Beverly. Sometimes folks just need backup in tough spells. I yearned to trust him fiercely, so I suppressed the queasy sensation in my gut and opted for faith over doubt. After all, this was Lamont, my Lamont, who fetched me tea in bed every Saturday morn and remembered to grab my preferred herbal blend on his commute home. But the calls grew tougher to overlook. Renee's name illuminating his screen during supper, during our morning brew, even during Dorian's promotion event. Lamont would glance, scowl, and route it to messages. She going through it, he'd expound. Likely wants counsel about the guardianship fight. Now, the guardianship fight that, as I later unearthed, didn't exist because Renee had been single for 4 years. One afternoon in August, Cherie rang while Lamont was upstairs allegedly grinding. We were gabbing about her fall semester when she noted spying her dad at the plaza near her flat. He was with some lady and her young'uns. Cherie mentioned offhand. Swinging on the playset, looked like a genuine kin excursion. I nearly strolled over to greet, but they appeared, I don't know, close, like I'd be butting in on something personal. My palms chilled. What the lady look like? Auburn locks, attractive, younger than you. The kids were precious, 2 little boys and a girl. Pops was pushing the girl on the swing, and she was giggling wild. It was kind of heartwarming. But Cherie's voice petered. But what, baby? It was odd seeing Pops with other folks' babies. He seemed so at ease with them, like he'd done it countless times. And the way the lady was eyeing him, Cherie halted. Ma, everything straight between you and Pops? I fibbed seamlessly, shielding both my girl and myself. All good, sweetheart. Pops probably just bumped into his workmate and her young'uns. You know how he is with lil ones. But after I disconnected, I sat in the dimmed den for hours. Fragments of an enigma. I'd been refusing to acknowledge finally snapping into place. The extended eves, the dumped plans, the ceaseless calls, the snaps, and now this. My spouse acting kin with another lady's young'uns while I lingered at home pondering where our union had veered wrong. That's when I ceased battling for his focus and commenced paying focus instead. I heeded when he spoke, noting the wee discrepancies in his yarns. I watched his face when his cell rang, recognizing the varied looks he donned for varied callers. I began to log the shifts in our funds, the unexplained pulls, the card fees from spots I'd never visited, the cryptic cash buys that never had reasons. The term right-sizing first arose in October. Lamont dropped it casually over brunch, like discussing the climate. Real estate scene's boomin' now, he said, not lifting from his pad. Might be wise to consider right-sizing while we can fetch premium for this joint. I knew then, the way he dodged my eyes, the deliberate nonchalance of his pitch, the timing of it all. He wasn't planning to right-size with me. He was planning to expand with somebody else. But Lamont had committed one vital blunder in all his meticulous deceit. He'd presumed I'd stay the docile, believin' spouse who gulped every falsehood and embraced every pretext. He figured I'd perch quietly while he disassembled our existence bit by bit. He had zero clue that I'd already booked a meet with Latrice Simmons, the top separation lawyer in the region. Latrice Simmons's suite wafted of polished wood and premium aftershave, the sort of spot where influential folks came to unpack their existences with accuracy. I sat opposite her ebony desk, hands interlaced, watching her scan the dossier I'd toted, Account logs, card invoices, images printed from online profiles. Proof of existence running alongside mine. "Mrs. Underwood," Latrice said, her braided locks glinting in the evening glow pouring through tall panes. "I gotta inquire, you sure you want to go this route?" I affirmed, my voice firm. "I need to safeguard myself and my babies. My spouse thinks I'm clueless. I'd rather maintain that till I'm set." What I didn't share with Latrice was how I uncovered Renee's online footprint. It had been Cherie, funnily, who'd referenced viewing updates from someone at her dad's firm. "Pops's workmate always posting these sweet kin pics," she'd said during one of our regular calls. "Makes me nostalgic for being small." The name Renee Hayes had lingered in my thoughts till curiosity triumphed. One evening, while Lamont labored late, or claimed to, I'd hunted her digitally. What I discovered made my tea chill in my grasp. Renee wasn't merely posting kin pics, she was weaving a tale. Snaps of her young'uns at plazas I knew, eateries Lamont had cited for business lunches, even the frozen yogurt joint where he'd escorted Dorian and Cherie when they were tiny. But it was the descriptions that really pierced. Day trips with my fave folks. She'd penned under a snap of her daughter on the identical swing setup where Lamont had pushed Cherie 25 years prior. The little girl was chortling, her braided twists swaying, while a man's hands I'd know any place, steadied her from aft. Another update displayed her boys constructing mud forts at the shore. "Showing 'em that fresh starts can be lovely," was the tag, posted the same weekend Lamont had told me he was at a required job seminar. In the backdrop, hardly noticeable but undeniably there, was Lamont's signature green button-up, the most crushing update hit in November, a snug supper vignette at what appeared Renee's pad, tapers flickering on a compact table, her young'uns in coordinating sleepwear encircling a man whose face was meticulously trimmed from view. The tag read, "Thankful for the fella who teaches my lil ones what true affection feels like. Some souls enter your world and show you what you've been lacking." 42 hearts, 15 replies from kin, and pals cheering her bliss, toasting her for landing someone exceptional. I'd sat staring at my tablet till my eyes stung, wondering how many of these folks knew her exceptional was wedded. But it was the monetary proof that truly unveiled the extent of Lamont's trickery. While our own cards hit limits and notices stacked unpaid, odd fees popped on logs I'd never glimpsed. A shared account I found by fluke when correspondence arrived at our spot for Mr. and Mrs. L. Underwood. Except the Mrs. wasn't me. I'd unsealed that packet with quaking hands, finding logs for a card I'd never authorized in both Lamont's name and Renee Hayes. The fees sketched a portrait of homey joy. Food markets, plaything shops, kids' apparel outlets. $700 at a spot called Tiny Treasures Furnishings, likely loft beds for her boys. $500 at Fairy Tale Fashions, no doubt for her daughter. Meanwhile, our rent note had lagged thrice, and I dipped into my own nest egg to pay the gas when Lamont swore his paycheck was held up. The most hurtful find came when I unearthed slips in Lamont's blazer pocket. Not shady by themselves, just routine buys from Walmart and Rite Aid. But the goods narrated a tale that shattered my spirit. Kids' Motrin, themed plasters with fairies and heroes, nighttime tales volumes, even a slip for a celebration cake with Happy 5th Birthday Tia, scripted in blue icing. He was living a full dad's existence with Renee's young'uns, while his own grown offspring pondered why he seemed so aloof during kin chats. I began cataloging everything. Captures of online updates, duplicates of fiscal logs, snaps of slips. Not because I aimed to harm him, but because Latrice had cautioned that fellas like Lamont, accomplished, charismatic, networked, often sought to revise the past in split cases. "He'll assert the funds were for legit work costs," Latrice had clarified during our third session. "He'll say the online posts are misconstrued, that he was just being neighborly to a coworker navigating a tough patch. Fellas in his spot are ace at steering stories." I stashed everything in a secure vault at a credit union downtown, someplace Lamont would never suspect. Every Tuesday I'd make my routine drops, adding fresh proof to the mountain stack. It felt like gearing for battle, which I reckon it was. The shattering juncture arrived on our milestone, November 20th. A date that had once signified candlelit suppers and considerate presents, extended strolls and murmured vows bowed again gracefully together. I'd arranged a table at Chez Monique 8 weeks ahead, double-checking to ensure all was flawless. At $4,000, I was slipping into the emerald gown Lamont had once claimed made me look radiant. At $430, I was touching up my lipstick one last time. At $500, I was poised by the entry in my stilettos and shawl, keys and grip. Lamont's ring came at $515. "Beverly, I'm truly sorry, but Renee's in a crisis. Total meltdown over the guardianship mess. I can't abandon her with the young'uns like this. Can we reschedule, perhaps next weekend? I'd lingered in our foyer, gazing at my reflection, dolled up with no destination, would to a man who was elsewhere acting savior to another lady's turmoil, the lady whose reality he'd once refuted, whose bond with him he'd downplayed, whose babies now trumped his wife of 28 years. Sure, I'd replied, my tone steady as steel. Can crises take precedence? After disconnecting, I didn't shed the gown. Instead, I cruised to Chez Monique Solo, perched at our duo's spot, and indulged in the priciest Cabernet on the list. The servers were gracious, acting oblivious to the lady marking her milestone dining alone. That evening, while Lamont was likely soothing Renee through her timely collapse, I dialed Latrice from my vehicle in the eatery's lot. It's go time, I stated plainly. The following morn, while Lamont snoozed late, drained from his night of heartfelt aid, I convened with Latrice and her crew. We devoted 5 hours charting a plan that would shield my stakes while keeping Lamont utterly clueless about the storm brewing. The shock factor is your prime edge, Latrice had noted. Fellas like your hubby function from a spot of presumed dominance. They scheme based on the notion that their spouses will stay meek and foreseeable, but I was through being foreseeable. The week post-Thanksgiving dragged like a limping beast. Lamont glided through the abode like a specter, the unsealed folder seeming to sear through whichever pocket he'd jammed it into. I observed him inspect his blazer, his satchel, his bedside compartment, always verifying it lingered, never quite gutsy enough to confront its contents. I carried on my usual pattern with a near meditative poise, morning tea, midday chores, evening broadcasts. But beneath, I was charged with eagerness. Each time Lamont's palm edged toward that folder, each time he began to utter something, then halted, I felt like a maestro, awaiting the ideal beat to hit the climactic note. On Friday morning, precisely 1 week after he shattered our kin's Thanksgiving, I was whipping up waffles when I caught footfalls on the steps. Weighty, intentional strides that hinted at a man who'd at last mustered the mettle to meet his judgment. Lamont emerged in the cook-space threshold, the tan folder gripped in his quivering palms like a device he feared would detonate. His locks were tousled, his eyes veined. He plainly hadn't rested much. "Mornin', Beverly," he uttered, his tone ragged. "What's this?" I turned a waffle with expert flair, not pivoting. "Unseal it and discover." The rip of paper echoed in the cook space. I could hear him unfurling the docs within, the shuffle of formal forms that would alter all. Then arrived the hush, extended, dreadful, utter hush that spanned between us like an abyss. When he at last spoke, his words were hardly a murmur. "You switched the title." I pivoted leisurely, locking eyes with him for the first time in days. His visage had blanched fully, and his hands trembled so fiercely the sheets quaked. 4 months back, I remarked casually, as if debating the climate. "Astounding how much docs go unchecked when you're occupied playing family with another's kin. You ambushed me." The phrases escaped as a snarl, brimming with fury and skepticism. "You orchestrated this entire scheme." I savored a gulp of my tea, relish in the heat. I safeguarded myself. "There's a distinction." "The abode," he began, then paused, his thoughts evidently racing through the ramifications. "Renee's anticipatin', we've been plottin'." "Renee's anticipatin' a abode that was never yours to bestow." I placed my cup down with intentional precision. "Ain't that something?" Lamont's cell began ringing. Renee's name blinked across the display, and I watched the hue leach from his face wholly. He'd evidently vowed her something he couldn't furnish, and now truth was phonin'. He picked up on the 5th chime, his tone falsely upbeat. "Hey, love." Renee's pitch was keen enough that I could catch every syllable from across the cook space. "Lamont, I've been pondering the schedule for the abode disposal. The young'uns are thrilled about their fresh rooms, and I want to begin scouting decor. When you reckon we'll have the docs inked?" Lamont's gaze met mine across the cook space. I grinned warmly and took another tea sip. "Actually, Renee, there's a hitch." The quiet on the far end was thunderous. When Renee voiced again, her tone had sunk to a perilous hiss. "What sort of hitch?" "Turns out the abode ain't technically under my name no more." "What you mean it ain't in your name?" "It's your abode." Lamont eyed me desperately, as if I might somehow bail him from the chaos he'd brewed. I returned to my waffles, humming gently to myself. "Beverly shifted the title," he uttered at last. "Without letting me know, I learned today." The outburst that ensued was magnificent. Renee's voice hit a level that likely cracked China someplace nearby. Terms like deceived and toyed with and deceitful viper saturated the cook space, and I had to concede I was struck by her lexicon. So let me clarify this, Renee was saying when her voice finally dipped back to mortal levels. You assured me and my babies a home that you never truly possessed. You led me to think we had a tomorrow when you were just another strayin' hubby with no solid scheme. Renee, please. Don't you dare, Renee, please me. I've squandered 9 months on a fella who can't even lock down a shelter for us. My youngin's been dreamin' their new existence, and you've been fibbin' to everybody. The connection severed. Lamont gawked at his cell like it had nipped him, then gradually lifted his gaze to me. She disconnected. Stunnin', I quipped dryly. Who could have foreseen that a lady seeking monetary steadiness might bail when the funds vanish? His cell hummed with a message, then another and another. I couldn't view the display, but Lamont's expression revealed all I needed about Renee's closing sentiments on their affair. 28 years, he blurted abruptly, his voice cracking. 28 years of union, and you wreck it all with forms. I pivoted to confront him squarely, and for the first time since this ordeal kicked off, I let my wrath surface. I wrecked it. I wrecked our union. I set my flipper down with sufficient vigor to make him recoil. You stood in our supper space before our babies and proclaimed your intent to offload our abode for your lady's ease, but somehow I'm the one who wrecked our union. You could have conversed with me, when the words sliced sharp as shattered crystal. Between your overtime at the office and your urgent rings from Renee, between your tall tales about hoop sessions and your hidden cards, precisely when was I supposed to have this chat with the outsider sportin' my hubby's face? Lamont attempted ringing Dorian and Cherie that afternoon. I watched him stride the den, leaving message after message that went ignored. When Dorian finally answered on the 5th try, their exchange endured exactly 45 seconds. We're back in Ma, Dorian stated, his tone ringing clear through the speaker. You picked at Thanksgiving supper. We've picked ours. Cherie's reply was even briefer when Lamont reached her that evening. Don't hit me up till you're set to say sorry to Ma. And I mean truly say sorry, not that phony exec jargon you've been spoutin'. By Monday, I was hosting my knit circle luncheon in the cook space Lamont had once schemed to cede to Renee. 10 ladies clustered around the counter where I'd arrayed fresh berries, scones, and the sort of premium brew I'd been conserving, 'cause our funds were pinched. The chuckles that permeated the area felt altered than in ages. Airier. Beverly, you seem so at ease lately, my pal Evelyn noted, grabbing another blueberry. You're straight up shinin'. I surveyed the ladies who'd been my pals for decades, seated in the abode I'd defended, relishing the existence I'd battled to maintain. I feel like I've at last quit holding my air, I said, and for the first time in ages, that was wholly accurate. The split docs landed on a Thursday in March, brought by a messenger who seemed regretful about interrupting my morning tea. I inked for him with firm hands, notin' how Lamont had initiated first, his last bid to steer a tale that had already eluded his grasp like vapor. Latrice had forewarned this would occur. Fellas like Lamont gotta feel like they're helm the procedure. She detailed during one of our tactic meets. Let him initiate. Let him believe he's taking command. Meanwhile, we'll be 4 strides ahead with our rebuttal. I placed the docs on my cook space counter without unsealing them. There'd be time to scrutinize Lamont's rendition of our union's end later. For now, I had an existence to reconstruct, and remarkably, it felt buoyanter with each passing day. Lamont had vacated in February, taking only his attire and abandoning 28 years of joint recollections like they were another's belongings. He leased a compact unit uptown, not the expansive abode he'd pledged Renee, but something that'd suffice while he regrouped. I caught wind through Cherie that Renee had issued him a final demand post their split. Demonstrate he could deliver the firmness she craved or forfeit her forever. Evidently, he'd opted to battle for her. Summer ushered an unforeseen turn. Cherie rang me on a balmy May morn, her tone fizzing with scoop that chilled my veins. Ma, you ain't gonna credit this, she said. Pops is tying the knot with Renee in July. I nearly fumbled my teacup. Tied already? I know, huh? The split ain't even sealed yet. But evidently, Renee pardoned him after he swore they'd commence trying for a lil one together. She wants to grant her young'uns a sib, and Pop's fully committed. At 56, Lamont was planning to reboot entirely, to wipe his initial kin and forge a fresh one with a lady 15 years his junior. The nerve was staggering. Y'all invited? I queried cautiously. Cherie's chuckle was sour. We both were, Dorian and I. Pops mailed fancy invites like we're far-off kin, instead of his babies. Dorian chucked his in the bin, but I'm pondering attending just to witness the show. After we disconnected, I sat in my yard for ages, digesting this newest curve. Lamont wasn't merely advancin', he was revisin' his whole self. The fella who'd griped about changing diapers when our babies were tiny was now vowing to redo it all. But something bugged me. Renee was 38, youthful enough for more babies. But why was she so fixated on conceiving pronto? The haste felt frantic, like she was aiming to bind Lamont with blood links before he could rethink. The revelation hit in June via a chat I wasn't meant to catch. I was at the market when I glimpsed Renee in the drug aisle chatting on her cell in muted, irate pitches. I hunkered behind the supplement rack, not proud of my snoopin', but powerless to halt. The guardianship pact demands it. She was saying, if I want to shift the young'uns out of state, their daddy needs evidence that my new hubby can sustain extra babies. It's some outdated stipulation about kin planning and monetary firmness. My pulse quickened. A conception exam. Renee required Lamont to verify he could sire babies as part of her guardianship setup. But what Renee didn't grasp, what Lamont himself had overlooked in his midlife haze, was the hidden truth he'd interred 29 years prior. That night, I placed a call I'd been dodging for months. Dr. Thompson, this is Beverly Underwood. I gotta inquire about something private regarding my hubby's health past. Dr. Thompson had been our kin doc for over 3 decades. He birthed both my babies, managed Lamont's cholesterol, and knew clan secrets dating back years. Beverly, he said cordially, how can I assist? Lamont's getting hitched again. His new bride wants lil ones. I need to know. Does he recall the outcomes of that conception test he took after Cherie arrived? The quiet on the other side lingered long enough that I figured we'd dropped. Beverly, Dr. Thompson said at last, that info's private. I can't discuss a patient's health history even with a partner. But theoretically, I urged, if someone were to seek a duplicate of those ancient test results for legal reasons, would they still be archived? Another lull. Theoretically, health logs are kept for 35 years. And theoretically, if someone with legal standing requested those logs as part of a split case, he let the phrase dangle. I got it crystal. The next morn, I rang Latrice with a unique plea. Within a week, Lamont's full health history was summoned as part of our split cases. Nestled in 29 years of standard exams and script logs was a lone test outcome that Lamont had begged Dr. Thompson to keep hush at the time. The poetry was exquisite. After Cherie's tough delivery, Lamont had covertly gotten checked because he'd been fretting about more babies. The findings had revealed gravely impaired conception. Not unfeasible, but improbable without med help. He'd never clued me in, opting instead to let me fault myself for our failure to have more after Cherie. Now, 29 years on, that identical test outcome was bout to derail his schemes for homey joy with Renee. Latrice's crew orchestrated for the health logs to be dispatched to Lamont on his wedding day. Not from spite, but because the timing synced flawlessly with Renee's guardianship session, slated for the next Tuesday. She'd need those conception results as proof for the judge. I spent that Sunday morn in my yard planting lilies where Lamont's basketball gear used to dwell in the shed. The symbolism wasn't missed on me. I was literally flourishing where he'd once occupied room. My cell rang at 3:30, Cherie's digits. Ma, she said, her tone taut with stifled giggles, you ain't gonna believe what just went down. Hit me. The nuptials off. Renee learned Pops can't have babies. Evidently, she unsealed some health docs that got delivered this morn, scanned 'em while getting her twists done, and by the time Pops reached the spot, she'd already bounced town with her young'uns. I shut my lids, sensing the balmy sun on my face. That's regrettable. Ma, Cherie said dubiously, you wouldn't know nothin' about those health docs, would ya? Your Pop's health past is his own affair, I said honestly. If he opted not to share key info with his intended, that's 'tween 'em. That evening, I lounged on my front stoop with Dorian and Cherie, sharing a bottle of Merlot and watching the sunset dye the heavens in hues of triumph. Lamont was someplace uptown, likely perched in a vacant reception hall, encircled by arrangements nobody'd view and a tomorrow that had vaporized like dawn fog. Meanwhile, we were precisely where we fit in the abode he tried to gift away, forging fresh recollections on the bedrock of the prior ones, proving that sometimes the finest payback is simply refusing to let another's picks demolish your joy. Fate, I'd grasped, doesn't always show when you anticipate, but when it does, it has impeccable timing. The spring blooms were just emerging when I got the invite in my postbox. Tan stock, graceful penmanship, the sort of proper notice that hinted at fresh starts and meticulous scheming. Dorian's betrothal bash set for the first weekend in May at the community center, where he'd learned to ride bikes as a tyke. I traced my digits over the raised script, grinning at how existence had looped full. My boy had discovered affection with Kendra, a sharp engineer who made him chortle in ways I hadn't heard since he was a teen. They'd been courting for 3 years, but something about this past year had cemented their bond in a manner that spoke of endurance and true alliance. Cherie was flourishing too. Too. She'd finished magna cum laude and snagged a role at a top-tier civil rights firm in Portland. Her pitch during our regular calls bore an assurance that hadn't existed before, as if observing me reconstruct my existence had granted her leave to envision grandeur for her own. The abode had turned truly mine in ways beyond legal papers. I'd recoated the den in warm terracotta, displayed sculptures I'd picked without seeking another's view, and turned Lamont's old study into a craft corner brimming with herbs and sunshine. The area inhaled differently now, relieved of the burden of facade and buried grudges. My morning habit had morphed into something I genuinely anticipated. Tea on the rear deck, 30 minutes of meditation in the solarium, then whatever the day delivered without the perpetual undertow of strain that had marked my union's closing years. Some morns I tended the yard, others I crocheted afghans that had never graced boutiques, but brought me serene fulfillment. On Fridays, I volunteered at the community center uptown, aiding other ladies navigate the legal mazes of rebootin'. Latrice had evolved beyond just my counsel. She'd turned a pal whose insight stretched far past legal tactics. Our work tie had wrapped when the split sealed 7 months back, but we still convened sporadically for tea to chat novels or neighborhood affairs. She'd never re-wed after her own split 20 years prior, and while neither of us had raised the topic of anything beyond camaraderie, there was a comfort between us that felt like potential. Lamont's path had veered differently. After Renee's exit, he'd plummeted in ways that might have worried me once. He'd forfeited his gig 4 months post the wedding fiasco, officially from reshufflin', but folks knew his rep for dependability had shattered with his private existence. His bids to reconstruct with Renee had flopped dramatically when she'd relocated to Texas, with her young'uns and a fresh beau, leaving no relay address. I'd heard via Dorian that Lamont was freelancing as an advisor now, residing in a one-room flat and driving a 12-year-old coupe. The fellow who'd once ruled meetings and mapped others' tomorrows was learning what it meant to reboot at 56 with naught but his ego, and even that was tarnished wares. But the most shocking shift had arrived just last month. Lamont had rung me straight for the first time since the split, his tone tinier than I'd ever known. Beverly, higite, naim, ipte, he'd said. I know I got no claim to request anything of you, but I gotta know. Will you be at Dorian's betrothal bash? The query had startled me. Of course I will. He's my boy. I want to attend too, but I won't if it unsettles you. I know I've forfeited the claim to space in our baby's festivities, but I'd like to attempt to mend some sort of bond with him, if that's feasible. I'd sat in my cook space gazing out at the yard where Lamont's basketball gear used to dwell, weighing my reply. The lady I'd been a year prior might have seized this chance to land one final strike, to remind him of all he'd forfeited for 9 months of midlife delusion. But the lady I'd become grasped that my serenity didn't demand his ongoing agony. Lamont, I'd said at last. Dorian and Cherie are grown. Their ties with you are their call to make. But I won't be the cause you can't try to fix what you shattered with them. The betrothal bash arrived with ideal April climb, fresh breeze, vivid azure heavens, the sort of day that made all seem achievable. I selected a crimson ensemble that made me feel assured without overdoing, matched it with the gold hoops my grandma had bestowed and drove to the community center with windows open and tunes blastin'. Dorian appeared luminous in his navy ensemble, Kendra shimmering beside him in a frock the shade of blush. They navigated the throng like folks who truly savored each other's presence, pausing to chat with pals and kin who'd assembled to toast their tomorrow. Lamont showed midway through the mingle hour, appearing unsure as he lingered in the entry surveying the space. He'd shed pounds, and his locks had more silver than I recalled, but he'd attired thoughtfully for the event. When Dorian spotted him, I observed my boy's face keenly, trying to measure his response. What I beheld surprised me. Not absolution precisely, but something milder than the ire that had shaped their bond for the past year. Dorian neared his pops with Kendra at his flank, and they conversed softly for several minutes, for Dorian presented Kendra to the man who'd skipped so much of their romance. Cherie joined him shortly after, and I watched from across the space as my babies made their own picks about atonement and fresh shots. They were courteous, but not gushy, polite, but not cozy. Lamont would have to merit his path back into their existences, one exchange at a time, and there were no assurances he'd triumph. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing on the balcony overlooking the park where Lamont had once spent his Sunday afternoons. The symbolism wasn't missed on me. I was claiming turf in a realm he'd once ruled while he stood inside trying to reconstruct spans he'd torched for someone who'd never truly grasped him at all. Latrice materialized beside me with 2 flutes of bubbly. "How you holdin'?" I took the flute, pondering the query. "Seriously, better than okay, actually. Good. Really, truly good." She grinned. "You've merited it." Gazing back at the bash through the tall panes, I could see Dorian and Kendra slicing their betrothal cake while Cherie snapped pics and Lamont stood a tad apart, unsure of his spot, but thankful to be included anyhow. This was my fresh existence, not flawless, but sincere, not without hurdles, but erected on a base of my own selectin'. I'd grasped that sometimes the finest payback isn't demolition, but rebuildin'. Not ripping down the one who wounded you, but constructing something superior from the fragments they abandoned. The lady who'd perched at that Thanksgiving spread 12 months prior had been scared of losing all. The lady standing on this balcony had unearthed that sometimes losing all is just another way of saying you're at last free to pick what follows, and what followed felt like opportunity extending. As far as the skyline, radiant with vow and wholly my own. If this tale of sweet justice had you gripped, tap that thumbs up right now. My fave bit was when Beverly serenely passed Lamont that enigmatic folder at Thanksgiving supper, knowing precisely what thunderbolt lurked inside. What was your fave instant? Spill it in the replies below. Don't skip more griping tales like this. Sign up and smack that alert bell so you never miss a post.